as for what to begin with, as is said in the entry to the middle way by the master Chandrakirti, he describes the kind of benefits that come from being patient, from having forbearance. It says here, but forbearance brings qualities opposite to those just described. So actually, he describes above the kind of faults that come from anger. So in the verse that precedes this, it describes how wrath disfigures your face and leads you to what is unwholesome. It robs your mind of the judgment of what is right and wrong. Intolerance is swift to throw you to the lower realms. So here, when we are angry, when we sort of get fully under the control of our anger, we are very unpleasant to others. I mean, it sort of disfigures your face. You don't appear attractive or pleasant to others. And it leads you to what is unwholesome. You don't follow after those kind of good beings, but rather are just sort of attracted to those things that are unwholesome. And so, too, it really robs your mind of the kind of discriminating intelligence, the sort of judgment to think about what is beneficial, what is right, what accords with the kind of benefit to self and others, and what is going to lead to harm to self and others. And so when we are angry, we just follow after that anger. It really gets rid of any kind of judgment that we might have. And so here, the qualities of patience, of having forbearance, are described as the opposite of those. Forbearance makes you attractive and dear to the sublime ones. You become wise in knowing what is appropriate and what is not. Afterward, you gain birth as a deva or as a human, and it secures the exhaustion of negative karma. So here, when we are able to practice patience, the kind of results that come from that, as it's often said, is that an attractive form comes from patience. So we have a pleasant appearance that allows us to get along well with other beings that we encounter. And we will also follow after, sort of be dear to the sublime ones, those who are acting wholesomely or virtuously. And it's, maybe most importantly, you will become wise in knowing what is appropriate and what is not. You will act sort of in accordance with logic, recognizing what is beneficial to yourself and to others, what is harmful to yourself and others. So that kind of discriminating intelligence or analysis that is robbed when we are angry is something that we are able to preserve and increase when we have this kind of patience. So here in this life as well, if we have patience, we will gain benefits. We will reap the sort of positive benefits from that. But in future lives, it leads to a birth as a deva or a human. So by thinking about the kind of defects of anger and the benefits of patience, we should really make an effort to at all times have this kind of patience. So, here, when we get angry, if you're angry, you have no kind of discriminating intelligence or judgment about what is right and wrong. This really causes us to destroy our own happiness. When we get angry, we lose our mental peace. We get rid of our any kind of mental happiness that we have, and that can cause us to ruin the happiness of others around us. Now, if we have some level of, say, love and compassion, it might be the case that we don't allow that sort of unhappiness that we feel to spread to others, or we don't let our anger cause us to harm others. But if you are lacking in love and compassion and you come under the control of anger, this can mean that you engage in all kinds of harmful activities, not considering the kind of suffering that you will bring for others. This can cause one to engage in all kinds of non-virtues that not even thinking about the sort of ripening results, not thinking about the harmfulness that it brings to others, let alone the sort of happiness of your own that you have destroyed. And so here, again, it's often repeated that there's no non-virtue like anger, because not only does it destroy our happiness in this life and cause us to create kind of non-virtuous actions that will ripen in the future, but it also is going to destroy the sort of virtues that we have done in the past. So even if we have made an effort to do good things, to do positive things, to do virtuous actions, our anger can destroy those ripening results before they even come about. So in the course of our life, in trying to take care of ourselves and sustain ourselves, it's extremely important that we rely upon patience and don't allow ourselves to get angry, recognizing the grave faults of this kind of attitude. Here in the course of our life, we're going to face many different situations where, say, things don't go our way or are not appropriate or how we want. And it's important that we familiarize ourselves regularly with this practice of patience, being able to bear with those kinds of things that come up in the course of our life. We have to make a kind of effort to not give rise to anger, recognizing the sort of fault of anger. And so here it's important to then understand, well, where does anger come from? What causes us to give rise to this kind of anger? And we see that there are all sorts of different situations where something doesn't go our way. Like maybe even the roads are busy, or there's something with the sort of elements, it's raining, or someone harms us in some way when we did nothing to them. There are all kinds of situations where we get a little bit like upset, our mind gets unhappy, and it is that mental unhappiness that causes us to give rise to anger and hatred. And so here it's important that no matter what others do to us or whatever situations we might encounter that we see as inappropriate or suffering or what be it, we're not going to get angry, but rather be able to bear with that. So if there is a situation where something is, say, not how we want or not exactly right, if we get angry at those little kind of things, then it's like we're abiding in this state where just anything can provoke us into anger. We're so easily upset, or our mind is so easily disturbed that we can get angry at anything. But here, I mean, there are some people, we know people like this who are just constantly on edge, almost about to get angry. Their face will get all distorted and they're just they start yelling at people and things like that. And really, it's the mental unhappiness. As strong as our mental unhappiness is, so strong will be our anger that comes out of that. So we should instead have this kind of attitude that no matter what kind of conditions come along, no matter what sort of suffering situation, we're going to not get upset, to be able to bear with that. And it is by being able to bear with those sorts of smaller things that we gain the ability to bear with, be patient in any kind of situation. So here, Shantideva describes this and elsewhere, that when something doesn't go our way or something obstructs what we want, if we allow ourselves to give rise to that kind of unhappiness, then we're going to get angry. But instead, we should recognize, as he says, that if there is a way to fix a situation, then why worry? We should just fix it. If there is no way to fix the situation, then why worry? We can't fix it. There's no reason. We shouldn't allow ourselves to give in to that kind of mental unhappiness. Instead, if there's a way to deal with the situation, we deal with it. But seeing the strong faults of anger, we should not allow our mind to get disturbed and have that act as fodder for our anger. So here again, Shantideva says that whatever situation arises, we should have this attitude that we're not going to let it steal our joy, let it steal our mental happiness. So if we allow ourselves to be upset or disturbed by whatever kind of situation where we don't get what we want, or it's something unwanted, if we allow ourselves to get angry, that's going to damage our own ability to accomplish what we do wish to accomplish. It's going to ruin our own kind of mental peace and happiness. And the more we sort of start thinking about it, ruminating over what we're angry about, say, we're just going to create more and more non-virtue, get ourselves more and more upset, and be more likely to engage in non-virtuous actions. So this as well will cause our virtue to decline. Any sort of positive actions that we have done are damaged by that kind of anger. So recognizing this, we should have that kind of steadfastness, as he expresses in this verse, that whatever arises, whatever kind of situation comes up, we're not going to allow anger to let our minds get disturbed and steal that joy away. So recognizing the defects of anger and the benefits of patience, one should make an effort continually to practice this. So, in teaching the six perfections, again, the Buddha taught generosity, then ethical conduct, and then patience as the third of these perfections. And generosity is, being giving to others, benefiting others in various ways. And ethical conduct is really the abandoning of any kind of harm, abandoning negativities of body, speech, and mind, engaging in virtuous actions, and purifying our negativities, and so forth. But we need the practice practice of patience as well to sort of preserve all of those virtues, all of that good that we have done, such that it's not destroyed. One can see if you're like normally doing lots of positive actions, lots of good, virtuous things, but then get angry, that can destroy all of those sorts of positive actions that one has accumulated. It becomes something that doesn't go toward being a path. There's a danger of really destroying everything that one has accomplished. And so here it's important again to have patience, that even if we are to say engage in lots of activities to benefit others and try to develop love and compassion and so forth, if we give rise to anger, those kinds of roots of virtue are destroyed. For them to be able to flourish, to bring about their kind of ripening results and also to become a path, we need to make sure that we have the kind of patience that allows our virtues to preserve, to allow those kind of qualities to continue and improve over lifetimes. So here, then thinking that the virtues that we have accumulated, virtues of contemplating, giving rise to love and compassion, making sure not to harm others, and so forth, all of those kinds of positive actions that we have accumulated, in order to be able to increase them and develop them further, we need to not fall into the lower realms, but instead gain a good rebirth in the future, in order to be able to continue to develop and expand, increase those kinds of qualities. So as it says here in the verse by Chandrakirti, that forbearance makes you attractive and dear to the sublime ones. You become wise in knowing what is appropriate and what is not. Afterward, you gain a birth as a deva or a human, and it secures the exhaustion of negative karma. So at the very least, we should be thinking that we are going to try to practice patience, and as well as the Dharma and so forth, in order to be able to ensure such a good rebirth in the future. Not to thinking I'm not going to allow myself to come under the control of anger, such that it destroys those kinds of virtues that lead to a good rebirth in the future. But recognizing that even a good rebirth as a human or a god is still within the nature of suffering. One should think that I'm not doing this just to escape the suffering of the lower realms, but also to gain a kind of stable, lasting happiness, something that is free from the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, to be able to gain real freedom from this cycle of suffering. But even that kind of goal is not really sufficient, because thinking that really I need to make effort over a great period of time in order to try to benefit all of these sentient beings around me, all of whom have acted in the capacity as my father or mother or loved one. There's not a single one who has not. And so really, all of this time, through countless rebirths, I've had this kind of attitude of cherishing myself, of only thinking of yourself. And at that point, we can recognize that that hasn't brought us out of this kind of suffering. Instead, we're still sort of in this same situation. And so thinking in this way, one gives rise to this kind of a determination to exchange this self-cherishing attitude for an attitude that cherishes others, by getting rid of that kind of focus on just our own aims and instead trying to cherish others as our main focus, casting aside our own kind of self-cherishing attitude. We can then, in this way, give rise to this attitude of bodhicitta. And this attitude of bodhicitta meaning that we wish to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, that really other cherishing kind of attitude brought to its culmination. And so one should think that for this purpose, I'm going to listen to these teachings, listen to the Dharma, and not just listen to the teachings, but really take the time to contemplate them again and again, familiarize myself with them, such that eventually I can give rise can become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So at the very least, we should just have a positive kind of attitude for listening to these teachings, at best this sort of bodhicitta attitude. So here we will pick up in the text. I don't think we need to do a review. Lots of things will come again and again as we go through. So here it's a little bit hard because the Tibetan sentences sometimes end a little bit different. But consequently, we're on page 15. The Blessed One used the convention dependent and linked arising with respect to things for two purposes. So here, to end the misconception that composite things exist from their own side independently, and to end the faults that ensue from this misconception. And so here, this grasping at things, grasping both at the self of persons and the self of phenomenon, as having this kind of existence from their own side, this independent existence. This is the source of all of these various thoughts. We first have this thought of I, and then we have this kind of clinging to, grasping at that I, and a disregard for those others. When we hold to this I, we kind of hold everything good on our side. We get very sort of biased and possessive. Like any sort of reason can become something to distinguish between self and other. Sort of we can be like, well, I was born in the East and those people were born in the West, or like I have yellow hair and that person has black hair, or whatever it is. We can use this kind of discriminating thinking where we are holding to a really strong I, and therefore then holding as well to this idea of other. We have like this side that is better and therefore the side that is worse. We're not really thinking about the fact that we all just want to have happiness and we all don't want to suffer. Instead, we sort of get into this kind of holding I and then holding other. So here, just to give a couple of examples about how we do this, some that might just kind of make you laugh. One is presented in the 400 verses, where it's said that there was a time when there are a bunch of different sort of parties having a picnic in this large park. And it would have been the case back in the day that they didn't have any sort of special bathrooms. You just would need to go to the side, the edge of the park to do your business or to throw away your trash or whatever it might be. And so one of the parties gets up and goes and leaves the park, and the other is left there when the sort of owner of the area comes around and is like, hey, you know, you need to go clean up all around this park. There's people that have left, you know, things that need to be cleaned up. And so this party goes around and they're looking at, say, having to clean up mess, things that are not clean, but they only really want to touch anything that's related to their own party. It's not like there's any difference between something that is gross, that is produced from one person as opposed to the other person in terms of its color or its smell or whatever it may be. But because of our mental projections, we think, well, oh, this is our mess, my mess, so I can clean it up, but that's some other person's mess. Like, that's gross. I don't want to have to touch that. And so this is all made up by our mind. There's no sort of difference between the mess of one person and the mess of another person, but yet we hold to, oh, well, that's mine. Or like there's another story about a woman who was sort of like an upper class woman, and she had her attendant, and both of them got sick from eating some bad food. And so they're both sick and vomiting. But the sort of upper, you know, sort of boss woman has a silver kind of bowl that she's getting to throw up into. And she looks at her, you know, attendant or her servant who's only got like a clay pot that she gets to vomit into. And this woman is sort of giving rise to pride, like, oh, look at my vomit bowl. And it's like, well, they're both suffering and they're both vomiting. But we can really hold this sense of like I and mine as being better, even when it's just kind of ridiculous. So, here, then, as it says, this, again, this teaching of the convention of dependent and linked arising with respect to things has this first purpose of ending the misconception that composite things exist from their own side. So this independent sort of grasping at things to exist independently or autonomously, the self of a person or the self of phenomena. And then due to that, all of the kind of faults that ensue from this kind of misconception, we hold strongly to a sense of I, and then the sense of mine, and so forth. And from that, all of the various afflictions occur, and the kind of karma that comes from that. So here, this is the purpose in teaching this. And then to show, secondly, that with respect to all dependently arisen phenomena, all presentations of actions and agents are coherent in being mere dependent imputations. So here, everything is dependently imputed included in that, so whatever object it is designated on a particular basis, a particular collection of parts. Something like a house, for example, when you have walls and windows and a roof and so forth, you can designate that as being a house. That is, and you can even touch the house. But when you try to search for within that basis of designation, within the collection of the parts, like the right side, the left side, the roof, the windows, the so forth, you can't actually point to something and say that is the house existing autonomously, existing independently, somehow from its own side. So really the imputation, the designation of house on the basis of that collection of parts is the extent of the existence of that house. But that's coherent. Agents and actions can function. One can talk about things as functioning within there not being something beyond that kind of imputation. So, here, there's nothing that is sort of established from its own side without being dependent on that imputation as well. And so here, when it comes to, say, the I, there's nothing about the I that exists either within the collection of the aggregates of form and feeling and so forth, nor apart aside from them. But yet we can talk about the I in a coherent way as acting as an agent and so forth. And so too, when it comes to everything else, like fire is able to burn, water is wet, but that does not mean that they are independent or beyond being mere dependent imputations. So here, the Rice Seedling Sutra, getting now to the definition of dependent arising of composite phenomena. So here, the Rice Seedling Sutra, quoting from that, it says, because this exists, this occurs. Because this arose, this arises. This is called dependent arising. So here, particularly looking at, say, like a sprout, something like a field, when you have the particular causes and conditions come together, when all of those aggregate or all of those are present, then the sort of result will come about. A sprout comes about when you have the seed and the soil and moisture and heat and all of those kinds of components, those causes and conditions. Not like, say, a creator being thinking, oh, I want this sprout to arise, or this sprout will arise. It's only from the coming together of the causes and conditions, the kind of proper causes and conditions, that one can have a sprout come forth. It's not going to come about due to the sort of mental will of a particular kind of deity, like the thought that they have, like, oh, I will give rise to this sprout. But rather, it's only when all of the causes and conditions are present. That is the necessary component to bring about that kind of sprout. So any sort of result needs to come about from the aggregation of causes, and not just the kind of aggregation of causes, but a sort of concordant and appropriate kind of a cause. So things that are impermanent cannot arise from a permanent cause, cannot arise from, like, say, the Samkhyas would say, some sort of general principle, this sort of underlying principle that is the component, that is is what all of our universe is sort of made out of, is the substance of all of that. That is not something that is a suitable or appropriate kind of cause, nor is the sort of will of a creator. The cause needs to be both impermanent as well as appropriate for the particular result that it is bringing forth. And everything is such that it needs multiple kind of causes and conditions coming about. So here, as we can see, if something arises causelessly, again, this is one of the sort of views that is being negated here. The cause, it would have to be the case that it arises all of the time, or something would never arise at all. That's what happens when we assert that something is causeless, or that it is produced from a permanent cause. So again, we need to have some sort of result, that a cause that accords accords with the result, that is appropriate for the result, as is stated here, that is dependent on ignorance, conditioning factors occur. So here in the description of our sort of inner process of dependent origination, ignorance leading to conditioning factors and so forth through the 12 links of dependent origination, this is getting at the fact, as will be explained later, that kind of process of interdependent origination. But this is emphasizing that the cause needs to be an appropriate kind of a cause. So if something arises causelessly, then it needs to be, it couldn't just come in one place or at one time, but it would rather need to be in all places or at all times. Because if we have, say, something in one place but not in another, then it is occasional, then it is subject to a particular kind of cause that means that it's here but not there. Or if we have something that, say, arises in summer but not winter, there's a reason for that, that because things are occasional, that means that there can't be either no cause or a permanent cause. Otherwise, things would have to be in all places and at all times. And so too, this idea of dependent origination eliminates the kind of idea held most prominently by the Samkhya school of self-arising, that the result already exists at the time of the cause. Like they take the example of a sesame seed and they say, well, sesame oil is already there in that seed. You just squeeze it and it comes out. So here, the Buddhists refute that by saying that if something already exists, then what need is there for its production? If the result is already present at the time of the cause, then why would you need to have this sort of causal process? As Shantideva puts rather bluntly, if the result exists at the time of the cause, then when you're eating food, you would be eating shit, because that's the result that's going to come about from that. And so here, the potential exists within that cause, but not the result itself. And so too, all things need to have their appropriate causes, and something like a general principle underlying everything, from which things arise and then sort of dissolve back into, that too is not an appropriate kind of a cause. So because thus all composite things have causes, and effects do not exist at the time of their causes. Therefore, effects are not the same entity as their causes. Because causes and conditions exist, this effects occurs, means that composite things do not arise from a divine creator such as Ishvara thinking, I will produce this. But again, as we see, when these causes and conditions which are concordant with the effects they produce exist, that is when a variety of causes and conditions exist, a variety of new effects will certainly arise. No. So here, the first sort of point is that this composite phenomena do not arise from the sort of thought of a creator. Rather, again, whatever kind of phenomena it may be, from a rice seedling to the sun, the moon, the planets, our own sort of body, our happiness, our suffering, all inner and outer phenomena, they don't arise when a divine creator has a sort of intention or a thought, the will to produce that, but they only come about when their causes and conditions are complete. Even if you have all of the sort of causes and conditions, if you're lacking the causes and conditions, even with that sort of will of a creator, they couldn't bring things about. It's only through the coming together of all of the necessary requisite causes and conditions that we can speak of the arising of phenomena. So this is applicable to all things, all inner and outer phenomena. So then the first of those is, again, thus these new effects arise from causes that are not a divine creator's thought. And so then secondly, it's not just the case that it doesn't arise from the creator's thought. Things don't arise in that way, but they need to arise from kind of concordant causes, causes that accord with the particular result. So it continues saying also, when these effects that are composite things are produced, they do not come from causes and conditions that are unitary, partless, or permanent in the sense of being unchanging. In other words, any discordant causes such as partless particles and so on. So here, again, whatever is something that is permanent, and here one should understand permanent not in the sort of regular way of like something remaining for a long time, remaining stably for a long time, but really as it said that scholars, experts understand that impermanence is referring to a nature of non-disintegrating, not changing or disintegrating in any way. And so thus something that is unchanging cannot act as a cause. Something that is permanent has no capacity to bring forth a result. It can't engage in sort of benefiting or harming things. If something is permanent, such that its nature is not changing, it's not disintegrating or momentary in any way, then that's not something that can act as a cause. So whether it is some sort of idea of a permanent cause in terms of like a general principle or something like that, this is not tenable. And so, too, any kind of discordant cause, such as partless particles, are not suitable to be posited as causes. So, too, when it comes to like in general, we can speak about the universe being built on particles, on atoms, but they're not partless particles. They are not sort of the truly existent, most subtle sort of building blocks that lack any kind of parts. Everything would have to have a part. So, although it's said that in the sort of forming of the universe, there's extremely subtle kind of space particles that then create the universe. It's necessary that those particles themselves be impermanent, and they also can't be partless. And now there are some that would also assert that somehow time acts as a creator. And this is a different understanding of time, time as being something permanent, whereas the Buddhists would assert, particularly at these high schools, that time is something that is impermanent. It's actually a thing. And in that, for example, when we have a crop that comes about due to the passage of time, that is acting as a condition or as a cause, and such. And insofar as it acts as the sort of force of change, time itself is impermanent. And so there's nothing whatsoever that exists that could act as a cause in any of these ways, something that is unitary or partless or permanent. And so, here again, instead of that, then the sutra states that because the specific and ever-changing causes and conditions of the effects were produced, they will produce these effects. Because this arose, this arises. Accordingly, effects arise from many causes that are impermanent and have parts. So it's not possible, again, to have a kind of permanent singular sort of cause. Rather, the cause itself for impermanent phenomena needs to be impermanent, and it also needs to have parts. It is multiple. We sort of have the concordant conditions as well as the kind of the actual cause, the substantial cause, and so forth. All of those coming together. None of these things, nothing that is partless or permanent, or kind of sorry, non-changing, unitary, in that way, could act as a cause. So here again, we've established, it's decided that a thing does not arise, a composite thing does not arise from a permanent cause, as that kind of permanent thing would not have the capacity to give rise to it for the reasons described above. And it is not the case that just any cause with the capacity to generate an effect gives rise to any effect, but rather it is a specific kind of a cause. It is specific to the thing, the effect that it is going to produce. So like if we have a rice seed, then that's going to lead to a rice sprout. Whereas if you have some kind of other seed, like for a lentil or for wheat or something, you're going to get a different result. So we need to have both, again, this sort of substantial cause as well as the coordinating conditions in order to lead to a particular result. And as we have established above, it can't be something that is just from the will of a divine creator or a kind of permanent single cause. And here, this is the third sort of point that is emphasizing that it needs to be a particular, a specific cause, one that has, one with the capacity that corresponds to the effect that it will produce. That's what's going to give rise to the effect. And so, it has to be one, and here this applies to anything, whether we are talking about external phenomena like various types of grain giving rise to their respective sprouts, to our own sort of future happiness and suffering, and all of the kinds of experiences and things that we encounter. They all arise from specific causes and conditions. It can't just be from any sort of random causes and conditions. You can't have anything arise from anything, but rather they have effects correspond to their cause. And so here, thus, the sutra states, dependent on ignorance, conditioning factors occur, indicating that composite things arise from causes that have the capacity to produce them. So it is here in describing this kind of interdependent origination that we first have this thought of I, that fundamental ignorance, and then holding that I as most important, the sort of aims of that I. We then engage in various non-virtues and so forth. And in that way, proceeding through consciousness and ignorance and karmic factors in consciousness and so forth, name and form, all the way through the 12 links of dependent origination, each result arises from the proper kind of a cause. And so this is the case with external phenomena. Something that is going to produce a result needs to have the proper corresponding cause. And so too with any kind of inner phenomena. So here, again, this is the third sort of point with respect to causes. Here, the first being that effects don't come from the will of a divine creator. They can't arise from permanent or a single cause. And they also need to be from a particular result that has the specific result, the specific cause to give rise to a specific result. So here, in this case, whatever is a dependently originated phenomenon must fulfill these sorts of definitions. Now, there's sort of one in which there are three kind of parts to this definition. Again, that the production, that things arise from causes that are not the will of a divine creator. And there is production, they arise from multiple kind of impermanent causes, causes that are like not from a permanent cause. And it also needs to be the case that they are produced, that things are produced from the causes that have the capacity to generate a particular result. It's not just sort of any cause can give rise to any result. And there are some times when there are sort of three characteristics that need to be fulfilled for this definition, and others where there are five. And in those, that includes that the production does not arise causelessly, and also not from the sort of actions of a divine being. So here, again, when it comes to sort of talking about the definition of something, we can think of like the definition of fire as being hot and burning, but here the definition is like it needs to fulfill those certain sort of requirements. For things to be dependently originated means that they fulfill those kinds of requirements. So here, then, it continues in the text, and this, in short, it says, composite things are produced from their specific existent causes and conditions. If these specific causes and conditions do not exist, then composite phenomena are not produced. And so here, therefore, the citation from the sutra above affirms with certainty that effects are produced from causes that have a direct relationship with their effects, and in that the effects ensue once the causes exist and do not arise when the causes are absent. Now here in the Tibetan, it's a little like the words go a little bit quicker, but there's this important relationship of following after. So we could take, again, we can have two types of relationships between things, a kind of causal relationship, like smoke coming from fire, or you can have the kind of relationship of things being of a single nature, like a product, like products and impermanent. It's not like one leads to the other, but they're of the same nature. But here, when we have something like the case of a particular cause leading to a particular effect, it's such that it follows after. So if you light a fire, if you have a fire, you're going to have smoke come from that. That's the direct sort of relationship that you have there. And if you extinguish that fire, then there's not going to be that particular result. That's really what this is getting at here. So if you have a place where there's nothing whatsoever, somebody somebody walks in and they've got some fire, they light that fire, there's going to be smoke. That's the kind of direct causal relationship. And say they get rid of that fire, they carry it away or they extinguish it, then there's not going to be any more smoke. And so here, this is the kind of relationship that characterizes dependent origination between results, causes and results, is such that they have this kind of direct relationship that follows after. When there is a particular cause, that will lead to a result. And when that cause doesn't exist, it won't allow the result to arise. So then continuing here it says in the sutra explaining the first factor of dependent arising and its division. So here we're following the sutra, the rice seedling sutra, but the Buddha spoke of this as well in other sutras. And there are more on dependent arising. And the question arises, the question is posed of the Buddha, what is dependent arising? What characterizes dependent arising? So this question asks, what are the causes and conditions of external and internal things, and how do they produce composite things that are their effects? So here, as the Buddha did in the Rice Seedling Sutra, he responds with, because this exists, this occurs. Because this arose, this arises. This is called dependent arising. That is, dependent on ignorance, conditioning factors occur. And so here, again, this implies those three components of the definition, those three characteristics, that there is production from causes that is not a divine creator's thoughts, production from multiple impermanent causes, and production from a cause that has the capacity to give rise to the effect. So here, then again, quoting from another sutra, the sutra enumerating phenomena called Discerning the Divisions of Existence and the Rest, the Buddha, in response to a question regarding the definition of dependent arising, elaborates on production from the three causes. So here above in like the Rice Seedling Sutra and these others, the first factor, dependent origination, and so forth, it implies the kind of necessity of these three factors or sort of three causes. But here in this sutra, this particular sutra enumerating phenomena called the Discerning the Divisions of Existence and the Rest, here he actually lays out these three particular causes. So, O monks, there are three defining characteristics of dependent arising: production from a cause that is not a divine creator's thoughts, production from multiple impermanent causes, and production from a cause that has the capacity to give rise to the effect. So again, this is taught laid out very clearly, these three kind of characteristics, as well as it is implied in those other texts. So here, then the Rice Seedling Sutra adds two more to this list. So again, the idea that the causes and conditions need to be complete in order for something to come about, but they don't need sort of the will of a divine creator of some kind. It's only dependent upon having all of the sort of aggregation of causes and conditions. You don't need to have that kind of will of a divine creator. And if the causes and conditions aren't complete, then even if you were to have that, they couldn't bring about a result. And then, of course, they need to be multiple impermanent causes. You can't have a permanent kind of cause lead to impermanent results. And finally, the production from a cause that has the capacity to give rise to the effect. And so the Rice Seedling Sutra then adds on to those that production from existing causes and production from selfless causes, thereby giving a clear and detailed explanation of both internal and external dependent arisings from the viewpoint of all five defining characteristics. So here, it is not the case that from existent causes, from something where the result already exists, and production from a sort of selfless cause. So again, one doesn't need this, can't rely on something that is a permanent cause, something like partless particles or time or some sort of general principle, as well as from the kind of these other two are added to complete these five defining characteristics. So here then, quoting from his verses on the Rice Seedling Sutra by Nagarjuna. So Nagarjuna gave a kind of verse commentary on the Rice Seedling Sutra, wherein he says that nothing is produced from itself or from another, from both or from time, from a divine creator such as Ishvara, or from a principal cause, or without a cause. So it will continue then. But here, first beginning with nothing being produced from itself. Again, the cause, according to, like, say, the Samkhyas, for example, they would say that the result exists at the time of the cause, that something is produced from itself in that way, that, like, say, this principal nature is the source of all of the various phenomena within the world, and they actually exist at the time of the cause. So that kind of production is refuted, as well as a kind of production from other. Now, some would say that this is the way that things are produced. They would actually accept that production arises from another. But according to Je-Lama Tsongkhapa and those that follow after, this is a kind of production from another that exists from its own side. And that's something that cannot be asserted. And so nothing is produced from itself or from other, from both self and other, or from time. There's the potential for misunderstanding here because, again, we can see that things that are impermanent, they change with the passage of time, and in that way, they sort of arise from time. But this is a particular different understanding of time as being something permanent that can act as a cause. And again, that's not something that is viable. Nor do things arise from a divine creator, such as Ishvara, nor do they arise from a sort of principal nature or without a cause. This idea, again, of a principal nature is something that is espoused by the Samkhyas in particular, and it's actually considered to be the material substance from which everything arises. So in this way, that principal nature acts as a cause for everything else, but it itself is said to be causeless. Now, this creates kind of issues because to assert something causeless is very problematic. So when Buddhists, for example, talk about the origin of the universe, it's not as though that just arises from complete nothingness, but rather you can't really actually even point to a beginning, but rather we can point to sort of specific developments, like when there was an empty space, and from those very subtle particles of sky, this kind of gross forms arose and so forth. And so we can talk about kind of production in that way from specific causes and conditions, but talking about the sort of first cause, or whether that there could be something like a principal substance, a principal nature, which is causeless, that's not something that could be asserted. Now, when we look at the kind of like, if you trace everything from our mental consciousness to the sort of physical substance of our body, there's a continuity to those kind of particles, those atoms. We can, it would actually probably scare us a little bit to try to think about the origins of our body, like tracing back to this like sperm and egg of our mothers and fathers and their mothers and fathers and so forth, all the way back. But whether it's material things or the continuity of our own mind, it's not possible for us to assert that there is a beginning. So here, continuing into the second verse, it says, "An arising from causes and conditions comes from beginningless time. Thus you assert that external things arise in dependence on the five causes." So, here, then also from Nagarjuna, as he says in his extensive commentary on the Rice Seedling Sutra, "Aside from seeds and so forth, there are no other causes. Ishvara and causelessness contradict the obvious," and so on. So here, when it comes to, like, say, something like a rice sprout, that we need to have the proper kind of causes and conditions. We need the sort of cause of a seed. We have to have that kind of substantial cause of a seed, as well as the coordinating conditions to bring forth that seedling. But there's no other kind of cause that is necessary. We don't need Ishvara or some sort of divine creator to be able to bring forth a seed. And so again, this is something that if we have the causes and conditions complete, then things come about. The effects will naturally arise. Whereas if they are not present, if we haven't accumulated, we haven't collected all of the proper kind of causes and conditions, then there's no way that that can come about even through the will of a divine creator. And this is something that if we were to assert that things arise from Ishvara or arise causelessly, this clearly contradicts our direct experience. Like looking at the way that people make effort in order to plant their crops, in order to get a harvest. It's not as though they need to wait for Ishvara to like sign off on that for them to reap the result, but rather they make an effort at accumulating the proper causes and conditions, because it is exactly that brings forth results. If you didn't have that, then it wouldn't matter what people did. They couldn't bring forth results, or they would have something missing. But we can see this from our direct experience. Nothing arises causelessly without the kind of proper causes and conditions. When we look at our own experience, the kind of suffering and happiness that we experience is a direct result of the kinds of actions that we have accumulated, the kinds of actions that we have engaged in. And so this is the kind of making the assertion that there's some sort of divine creator that acts in the causal process, or saying that things are causeless, clearly contradicts our direct experience. It's really only our efforts, our actions that lead to results, because we're accumulating the proper kind of causes for a result to come about. Once I heard someone in India say like, well, if there's a creator God, I guess he just sort of made the planet and then stopped there, because we have to build our houses and our roads and stuff. So why didn't they continue creating all of these other things? So really, we can, through our own experience, have confidence in the fact that it is creating the causes that leads to a particular result, accumulating those causes or making an effort at those that leads to results, and nothing else. And that's something that we can have confidence in based upon our own direct experience. So here, something that just arises causelessly, or that arises due to the will of a divine creator, is something that's like a sky flower. It says, as a commentary to this verse, seeds and so forth produce sprouts and so forth. Ishvara, the principal nature, time, and the like, are not the causes of sprouts, for these causes would be just like flowers growing in the sky, not perceived either by direct perception or inference. So we'll stop there for today, as we're out of time.